I have Scott Burdick here, and we're at the Woolaroc, and this painting really just kind of caught me and stopped me. One of the reasons is it's different. It has a different sensibility with this background, this Albert-esque kind of thing. So maybe you were just saying this is kind of a new thing, right?
Well, I have done outlines before,
Yes.
and I've been playing with them recently. But I'm always trying to, in paintings, find ways to mix the three-dimensional with the more abstract or two-dimensional or even one-dimensional. So I've done lots of paintings like that where I'm doing, you know, thick and abstract with this. But in this one, I didn't go as thick in the background, but I wanted to have them be very three-dimensional.
Yes.
So they're painted in full value.
Yes.
And then with the outlines, it makes it one-dimensional. And then with these patterns, I didn't paint all the designs and things that were on here. This was in Tibet in a town called Shigatse. And so this is more two-dimensional, one-dimensional, and three-dimensional.
I see.
So my idea behind that is to, if I paint everything out to this degree, they actually don't look, they don't pop out as real as they do against that. It's kind of like if you're in music, you know, you're seeing a symphony and you have the quiet moments and then the symbol. Symbol, if it was all symbols, it would just lose its impact, you know? And those quiet moments, too, would lose their impact without, if it was just all quiet, you know? And so that's kind of what I try to do with these, is where my focus is, I want them to really pop forward. And so I feel like my hope is when you see them, because people are like, this looks more real than anything, you know, but it's because it's you know, counterpointed against these passages. So that's my idea, is to try to create a dynamic design.
Yes.
And there wasn't any red here when I did the painting. This is from a photograph I took in Tibet. And but then I try to balance. Like I try and, this was very red, and I love that. And then these were less so.
Yes.
But then I put these in. The same thing in paintings like this, where this was done from many, many different references that I took in Idaho, Post Falls, Idaho, and we were visiting George Carlson. And I loved this girl behind her with this neon kind of color. And so, but it didn't have that color in other places. And so I actually, when I painted everything, when I finished it, then I start adding a few spots in different places up here to balance, so that
to balance this component right here.
And there's other paintings where I've had that happen where it's like one in like the side, but then I'll have to move it in other places to give it some of the balance. And this one is a compositional one. It also, I let that go very abstract.
Yes.
And I actually photographed this in progress from all the photographs. We put it on Patreon, where it took me 3 days to draw this out in charcoal. So we shot it in progress, a photograph every minute. And so you can see how I would draw it all out in charcoal, trying to figure out the composition. Then I'd wipe people out, move them. And so it took 3 days just to draw it all out. And then initially I had a horse in the background, but then I decided it was becoming too all realistic. So this was that same concept of trying to let your imagination fill in some of those areas. And then compositionally, to make her looking forward, even though she's in the shadow, I wanted her to be the center of interest.
Yes, and
so
she is,
even though
for
these
sure.
are the brightest things, but the fact that she's looking at you, and everybody else is going this way, and then I compose them so that they would make like crosses,
like dynamic
They would
symmetry.
they go right through
her
it,
eyes,
so that it was all pointing towards her. So the compositionally, so as I worked it out from all the photos that I used, that was the challenge, was to build it that way.
And when you did that, did you know before you really started this, there's going to be a central figure that I want to come to?
She was my starting point.
Yes, I would think that would be
I
right.
loved her.
Yes.
So I show this, like when I did the demonstration thing, the video we made of it, I show all the photos. I had about 50 or 60 that I chose. And when I photographed things like this too, this was at a powwow. Post Falls, Sue and I were going to visit George Carlson and Pam, and they were just setting up in this field, and people just stayed there and camped for 3 days. So we stayed there for 3 days.
Was
and
it at the Crow? Do you know?
It was Post Falls, Idaho. I'm not sure what it was, like a fairgrounds, open fairground type thing. There weren't many people who came to see it. It was mostly just the Native American. There was 50 tribes from all the northeast. And so what I do when I photograph, I knew I wanted to do paintings of some of these things. but I photograph it as an artist, not as a photographer.
Right.
So I set up in one place and I'll shoot maybe 15 minutes so that I get all these, you can't even tell what's happening, but then I have them all at the same perspective, the same lighting. Then I'll move. I do the same thing when we go to Africa or India and they're doing dancing. I set up in one place, I'll shoot, then I'll move to another place and shoot. That way I've got, so then in the
Same
studio,
lighting. Yes.
I started with her and I drew her out. And then I started drawing out the other people. I tried to do like a little sketch like Thomas does with some of his, but this was too complicated. I couldn't figure it out in a sketch. So I just drew it here and then I would wipe people out, put people in until I felt I had the composition right. And so that was how I did it. And then I just started painting each one. And
Yes.
this took about probably 2 or 3 months to paint this all.
I would believe it.
And so it was kind of fun, but it's a challenge. But this one I don't have the one-dimensional outlines. I think this is the only one in this show where I have the outlines, but I do other paintings too where I'll do more outline. It depends on the subject. You know? So
Yes.
yeah.
And so this is, I would assume, a very large painting for what you do normally?
Yeah, I think it's probably, I only did a few paintings this size. Actually, I would only do big paintings if I could. They're just a lot of work, because I have to build crates for this, I have to ship them, all that sort of stuff. It's just, honestly, if I could just do them and it was somebody local or we didn't live out, but I love doing big paintings. Yeah. So
gives you a little more freedom, right, to explore.
The reason I like doing them big, because I've done smaller ones of powwows and things too, a few, but the fact that I can make the figure life size. So like if you see it in their house too, they have it hung so that her face is on level with you. Okay? And so it feels, there's a different sense when you see a painting like this in life. When it's life size, the figures in the foreground are life size, and then as they go back, they get smaller. You feel like you're meeting the person. You feel like you're in the scene. And it's the larger painting, when you're standing here, it fills your view. So there is a different sensibility than doing a smaller painting. Now, when you see this just on Instagram or on your phone, you don't get that sense at all. But when you see paintings like that or paintings like this that are larger, it's a different thing. It has a different emotional impact, as if there's an actual person there.
You can relate to it
so
more.
That's why I like to do big ones. Not just to do a big painting. So like a lot of portraits I do are life size, but if they're not part of a big scene, then it's okay to just make them that size. Like something like this is not too big, but she's life size. So it has that same impact, but if I want to have it as part of a whole scene, it just has to be big if I want that. Now, a lot of times I will go smaller because, again, if I just do all big paintings, it's just difficult to
and you
do,
also have to have the market for that too.
Right, and the big paintings have seemed to sell right away. I mean, this had like 50 names in for it.
Wow.
You know, everybody was saying, and it won the collector's choice at the show.
And which show was this?
This was at Prix de West.
Yes.
So yeah, this had won. I don't know when this was. 2015.
Oh yeah.
And but again, it's just so I know that I can sell them. It's a lot of work to crate and ship and all of that. And if one doesn't sell, then boy, that's a lot of
and that's
money.
one of the things people don't realize when you're in the art business. You also have to take those into consideration. Buying a big frame, where do you get it? It's expensive.
And
it
there's
takes
not
time.
so many people who have room. In fact, when I sold this, when I sold this at the show, it's funny because the wonderful collectors who bought this. They had bought a couple other paintings from other shows, but the husband, he kind of said, well, I don't think this will fit in our house. And the wife's like, it'll fit. And he said, I love the painting. And I told him the size, and he's like, oh, actually, that will fit. And so he was happy. But you could just see, even for them, with a really big house, I mean, it's true. I mean, how many people have room to actually put one? And they're wonderful. They actually have an incredible collection. So they actually have light on wires and stuff, so they're lit like a museum and stuff. And so, because if you just put a light up at the top,
you need
it's
more
not going to work. So just logistically, I like to do big paintings, but also it would just exhaust you if you were just only doing them. So
I would think you would go. No,
I
want to do smaller ones now.
Definitely.
Very good. Is there any other paintings you want to talk about in the show that really speak to you?
This is an interesting painting. This is the oldest one. It says 1991. I think that's when but actually the collector corrected me. It was actually 1989 that she bought this painting. so this was a kind of a turning point for me, because I'd mostly just been in Chicago. I grew up in a Italian immigrant neighborhood there, and when I was in art school, I started on the spring breaks with my sister. She had a volunteer group through their school, so we would go and do volunteering. This was the first trip I did. I like carpentry and stuff, and so we went and we worked on, other volunteers would come in every couple weeks, an orphanage in Mexico, over the border in Brownsville and Matamoros, and one of the Equilidoro type towns. And so there was all these orphans just living out in tents. But then on the way back, we stopped at this refugee camp in Texas, and it was the time when all of the refugees were coming from El Salvador, all the Contra wars and all that stuff.
Yes.
Many of the men had their hands cut off and all this stuff.
Yes.
And so this was a photograph I took of a girl in the camp, and we spent time there with them and helping volunteering, but also I was doing sketches and photographs, and I had a girl who spoke Spanish, and so she was telling stories. And it really was a turning point for me, because I loved reading history and things, but I really never read the paper as a kid or even through high school and stuff. I wasn't really that interested in current events much. And when I actually went to this and the orphanage, but especially this, it was like, I don't know anything about this war they're talking about and stuff. And it really was a profound moment for me to start learning about current things and trying to find out what was happening in the world. And so then I would, every year I would volunteer in different places. So I went, the year after this, I went to South Dakota and volunteered on an Indian reservation, stayed with a family there. And I did drawings of all of them, pastel drawings of all of them, just gave them to their whole family. And the father, and this is like, 30 years ago, 35 years ago, but the grandfather was older, and he'd been of the generation where they'd been taken out and put in a boarding school, beaten if they spoke their own language, only see their family like once, a year and stuff. And so it was very interesting, and just in fact, they made me promise not to ever go to the, because this was in the Black Hills where that reservation was, never to go to Mount Rushmore. And they told me the history of how it had been stolen and everything like that. And so I promised that, and I never have. But it was just starting to, so that's when I started reading about the history of the West and black cowboys and all these books. I mean, it was so fun talking to Thomas and Ezra about all these things, because it's like so many people, I would tell people about these things, they're like, I've never heard of that. What are you talking about? Black cowboys and black mountain men and all this stuff.
Majority, actually, of the cowboys.
I mean, there was like they think about a third were black, and then they're Hispanic, and maybe a third were what you consider people white of some things. But certainly the mountain men, they were the majority of those earlier ones. And the history is fascinating, but the history of the Native Americans was fascinating to me too. And so I love, that was when I started doing things on the reservation. I really don't consider myself a Western artist. I do paintings of Indians and of people of different tribes, but then of other countries. We go everywhere. So I just paint wherever we go. I read about the place we're going, whether it's Tibet or Nepal or
try to
Peru.
relate to that culture.
I read about the history. I read their
sense.
Sacred books. And I talk to people. When we go to India, I talk to them about all of their things and about caste system and all the different. It's just fascinating to me. And so then I paint them. So I think the paintings, or a lot of it, is an excuse for me to go and educate myself. And then I try to get a little bit of that in the paintings, the humanity of the people. And then I'll write things about essays about some of these things, and get some.
And when you see these paintings like this, all those memories flood back, I'm sure, including her, and everything. And this was really kind of a pivotal point for you, this painting.
And this was like the first show that I did at the Palette and Chisel, when we were there with Richard Schmidt and all of them. And you could see the style is even back then very much like his kind of style.
Yes, I can see that,
with the vignette, and which I don't do anymore, but it's really more about the girl's face and that whole idea of, looking at people and then wanting to know more about the situation.
And so when you did this retrospective, they're doing this at the Woolaroc in Bartlesville, Did you specifically go, this would be one I would like to
I
get
did.
in?
I asked, because it's Mary Linda and Jay Strokamp who bought this painting.
Yes.
And they probably have 20 paintings of mine from over the years. And this was the first show she came to. She had collected Richard Schmid's work. And so had come to the Palette and Chisel to see him and saw the show that I had there. So this was, I don't know what this was, but my paintings were probably like $200 or $300
Right.
at the time. She bought 5 paintings from that show.
Good job.
But it was really, but I asked her, because she's like, oh, well, we have this painting,
Right.
you know, which maybe are more bigger,
Right.
impressive,
Right.
like
Yes.
paintings. But to me, this was very, like, for
Pivotal.
me, a turning point. And I think it shows still, you know, the
It holds
emotion
up. Yeah.
in the girl's face.
Oh,
and
it definitely
the
does.
thoughtfulness of wanting
Yeah.
to know, you know.
Yeah, wanting to know.
Yeah.
Refugee girl.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
Well, thank you, Scott, so much.
Thanks for
Yes, if you get a chance to go to
hanging out.
Woolaroc, go check it out. And we'll have Scott on our podcast so he can tell more stories about his work and his life.
Sounds good.